a 55-gallon oil drum packed to the rim with concrete. Inside it, set in the gray like a fossil, the body of a girl. She had been there since January. When investigators finally chipped her free in March 1989, they understood she hadn't died quickly. She'd been 17. Her name was Junko Furuta. She was born in 1971 and raised in Masato, a quiet commuter city in Saitama Prefecture, on the northern edge of Greater Tokyo, the kind of place where the trains run on time and the streets empty after dark. She was a third-year high school student. By the accounts gathered after her death, Junko Furuta was unremarkable in the way that ordinary, well-liked teenagers are unremarkable. She did well enough in school, she kept her circle of friends. She held down a part-time job, the small after-class work that fills a Japanese student's afternoons, and she was saving toward the life she expected to have. That ordinariness is the point. There was nothing about Junko Furuta that marked her for what came. She was not running with a dangerous crowd. She had, by the family's account, declined the advances of one of the boys who would later be charged, and investigators have suggested that refusal is what set the rest in motion. A slight. More. On November 25, 1988, she was making her way home. The detail that survives is small and domestic. She was traveling alone on her bicycle in the early evening, the way she had 100 times before. One of the group knocked her from the bike. Another approached, posing as a rescuer, and offered to walk her somewhere safe. She went with him. That was the last free choice anyone come home that night. Her parents in Masato did what parents do. They waited. They called. They reported their daughter missing to the police, and for 44 days, they did not know that she was alive and close, held inside a house in the Ayase district of Adachi, in eastern Tokyo, in a residential neighborhood where families slept on the other side of the walls. What makes the case of Junko Furuta endure in Japan's memory is not only what was done to her, though that is the part most people cannot forget. It is the geography of it. The captivity unfolded not in some remote shed, but in an occupied family home, in a city of millions, behind an ordinary front door on an ordinary street. People came and went. The house kept its rhythms, and a teenage girl who should have been finishing her final year of high school was somewhere inside it, counting days that no one outside knew to count. By the time her name reached the newspapers, Junko Furuta was already a body in a drum. The country would spend the years afterward asking how a child could vanish into the middle of an ordinary neighborhood, and how the neighborhood could fail to notice. The house stood in Ayase, in Adachi Ward, on a residential street in eastern Tokyo. One of the 4 boys. His parents lived there. They were in the home during much of what followed. On the evening of November 25, 1988, Junko Furuta was brought through that front door, and for the next 44 days, she did not leave it alive. The group was led by Hiroshi Miyano, 18, who according to investigators had ties to local yakuza, and used that fear to keep the others in Gura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe. They were teenagers. The walls were thin. Families slept next door. In the first week of December, Junko Furuta's parents were still searching. Then a call came. Investigators say she was forced to telephone home and tell her family she had run away, that she was safe, that they should stop looking. The Masato police, who had logged her as a missing person, downgraded the urgency. The search slackened. That single coerced phone call bought her captors the weeks they needed. She was held in an upstairs room. The abuse documented by prosecutors was prolonged and escalating across the 44 days. Junko Furuta grew weaker through late December. By the new year, she could no longer stand. The medical evidence later presented to the court placed her death in early January 1989, most likely around January 4th. She was 17 years and 4 months old. After she died, the 4 boys carried her body downstairs, folded it into a 55-gallon oil drum, and filled the drum to the top with wet concrete. What investigators recovered first was not a body, it was the drum. The boys had hauled it to a stretch of reclaimed land in Koto Ward, a quiet industrial edge of Tokyo. The concrete set around her. For weeks it sat in the open, indistinguishable from construction debris. The break came from elsewhere. In late January, Hiroshi Miyano and Joe Ogura were arrested for an unrelated gang rape. Under questioning, one of them mentioned a body. Detectives pressed. The story came apart in pieces, and it led them to the drum in Koto. When forensic 1989, the body inside was too damaged for visual identification. They lifted fingerprints from the remains. The prints belonged to Junko Furuta. The autopsy cataloged injuries across nearly the entire body, the accumulation of weeks, rather than a single attack. Investigators concluded she had died of shock and her injuries, not a single fatal blow. The condition of the remains told the timeline on its own. The concrete had preserved the sequence of what was done. The forced phone call became its own line of inquiry. Police had to reckon with how the missing person case had stalled. The call had pointed them away from Ayase, toward the theory that Junko Furuta was a runaway, and that theory had cost the investigation its momentum at the only time it might have mattered. The detectives now understood the runaway story for what it was, a script she had been made to read. The 4 suspects were the 4 boys from the Ayase house. Their statements, taken separately, corroborated the broad outline even as each shifted blame. The Manito parents, present in the home, became a separate and uncomfortable question for the public and the prosecutors alike. Investigators weighed the Yakuza connection as the mechanism of control, the reason prosecutors argued that Junko Furuta was never moved or released. The physical evidence in the house and the drum, the fingerprints, the autopsy, and the boys' own confessions formed a case that needed no theory of a stranger. The people responsible had been inside the walls the whole time. So had Junko Furuta. The drum came out of the concrete in March 1989, and the question had never been answered. Hiroshi Miyano, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe were tried as juveniles, their names initially shielded by Japan's juvenile law. A weekly magazine broke that shield and printed them anyway, arguing the crime had forfeited the protection. That decision still divides Japan. One side holds that no child should be named in the press. The other asks why the law protected them at all. The debate never fully closed. The sentences became their own open wound. The longest term handed down ran to 20 years. For many in Japan, the math did not work. 44 days of captivity, a girl of 17, and terms that one theory holds were far too short for what the autopsy described. Investigators and commentators have returned to that arithmetic for decades, unable to make it balance. Then there is the question, prosecutors could never fully resolve. The Minato parents were in the house. How much they knew, how much they heard through the thin upstairs walls, what they chose not to see. The record establishes their presence. It does not settle their understanding. That silence is the part of the case that refuses to sit still. And the coerced phone. A girl alive in early December, made to tell her own mother to stop searching. Whether a single different word might have changed the 44 days is a question with no floor to stand on. The case of Junko Furuta remains, in Japanese memory, a closed file that never felt closed. The convictions stand. The men served their terms and, by most accounts, returned to which has fueled its own current of public anger about whether punishment ever matched the crime. The Furuta family has guarded its privacy, and the few statements attributed to them speak only of a daughter they wanted back. In the decades since, the murder of Junko Furuta has surfaced again and again in books, in documentaries, in true crime retrospectives. They keep returning to the same unanswered geography. How a house full of people stayed quiet. How a neighborhood slept. Each retelling reopens the question the verdict never answered, and the name of Junko Furuta carries it forward. She was 17 years and 4 months old, held 44 days, behind an ordinary door, while on the other side of the wall, the world went on as if nothing were wrong.